Have you heard about platonic love? It is a kind of love that was first introduced by the famous philosopher Plato, and since then it has gained widespread cultural acceptance. According to Plato, the will to seek out and consider beauty is fueled by love. This occurs gradually, starting with an awareness of the outward manifestation of physical beauty and progressing to an understanding of the inner manifestation of spiritual beauty. But how exactly did Plato love? Or more specifically, what kind of people did he love throughout his lifetime? In today's video, we will discuss the women and men who entered Plato's life and determine whether he indeed loved platonically or offered so much more. Welcome to Crazy Histories, where we bring you the craziest and weirdest facts from human history. Some of the things discussed in this video may be offensive or disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Who is Plato? It's undeniable that Plato is one of the most well-known, read, and studied philosophers in history. He lived and wrote in ancient Greece in the middle of the 4th century BCE and was both Socrates' pupil and Aristotle's instructor. He is famously written for being most influenced by Socrates, who frequently serves as the protagonist in many of his writings, but he was also affected by Heraclitus, Parmenides, and the Pythagoreans. Due to their age and the way they have been preserved throughout time, there is a debate to varied degrees about which of Plato's works are legitimate and in what sequence they were written. But the figure of Socrates that we know through these writings is thought to be one of the greatest of the ancient thinkers, and his earliest works are generally regarded as the most trustworthy of the ancient sources on Socrates. At the same time, his concept of platonic love also added so much to his long list of discoveries. What is platonic love? Many people believe that this kind of love is spiritual rather than physical. Some even go so far as to describe platonic love as impossible love, albeit that may be going beyond what Plato had in mind. In fact, the Symposium by Plato contains the best explanation of platonic love he has ever given. Greeks frequently gathered to celebrate, drink, and exchange ideas at banquets or symposiums. But for Plato, love is merely a tool for realizing this greatest ideal of beauty and not an end in and of itself. He explained that the first step is physical, or eros, love that enters through the eyes, pushes one to approach someone and is released by the senses. At this point, love is physical. This is why a lot of historians and casual readers alike believe Plato was not a big fan of physical love. Surprisingly, it seems not to be the case because, contrary to popular belief, Plato does not disapprove of the physical aspect of love and believes that in order to get to the ultimate idea, it is important to pass through this crucial step. Going back, historians also believe that Plato's Symposium actually talked about another kind of love, and by that I mean love between people of the same sex. Here's why: the Symposium and homosexuality. The topic of homoeroticism and the interactions between boyfriends and lovers are extensively covered in Plato's Symposium. This kind of partnership is viewed as not only natural, but also preferable to heterosexual unions in the speeches of Phaedrus, Pausanias, and Aristophanes. Other participants in the symposium, with the exception of Socrates, typically cite the example of a connection between two males. Phaedrus uses an army of lovers and boyfriends to illustrate the strength of love. In this instance, the deep feelings a man has for his senior, rather than the traditional pederasty practice, define the connection. Moving on, homosexuality was presented as a natural and purer form of love in Aristophanes' hilarious creation narrative. He explains it by stating that everyone is a fraction of a larger being that is composed of two people. Zeus punished these creatures by severing them in half. They could have been male-male, female-female, or male-female. Every person, according to Aristophanes, longs to be rejoined with their opposite. Most historians believe that Plato is reiterating the notion that homosexuality is purer than heterosexuality, and we will go over why later in the video. But despite how Plato viewed homosexuality, the question about his sexuality was left unanswered. Was Plato gay? Information regarding the ancient Greeks' sexual practices is always evolving. The Greeks were supposedly big on homosexuality, hedonistic behavior, and free love. Now, a study claims that the Greeks were actually quite conservative. The author of the book, Nikos Vrisimpsis, claims that it takes a very different point of view from the traditional one that is held around certain sexual practices in ancient Greece. Given that the material we have comes from a limited number of sources, we are unable to determine which of these viewpoints is more correct. What is certain is that for many years, the general public has believed that homosexuality was, to some extent, permitted in ancient Greek culture. But again, the most well-known discussion of homosexual love is found in Plato's Symposium, where it is compared to heterosexual love and described as being more ideal and flawless. Since then, a lot of people believe that Plato was homosexual and composed extremely poetic epigrams to boys as expressions of his passion with regard to the same sex. Plato felt that love and reason should be merged together in their ideal state, and that care for the body and the physical world of details should be eradicated. As a result, homosexuality had very little to do with sex. Even today, platonic love is the term used to describe adult love that is not sexual. Believe it or not, experts believe that he is low-key discriminative of heterosexual connections and prefers to spend his time with his male lovers. Plato's disdain for heterosexual desire was concealed by an artistic, extremely intelligent dislike of the feminine body. The idea that only a male intellect clouded by the sexual drive could call the stunted, narrow-shouldered, broad-hipped, and short-legged sex the fair sex is one that Plato would have agreed with. But neither Oscar Wilde nor Plato are emblematic of the late Victorian era in Britain. We can learn virtually nothing about the prevalent moral climate of their era from the sexual views of these two men. Homosexuality and the arts are intertwined in both contemporary Western culture and ancient Greek civilization. Boys who like the arts are still frequently viewed as effete. Manly pursuits call for physical exertion. On the other hand, homosexual aesthetes view heterosexuality as filthy and widespread, and sporty types as Neanderthals. Greek homosexuals shared the same style of thinking. That does not imply that Greek society as a whole approved of homosexuality. But as expected, the theories of any number of contemporary Greek sociologists pale in comparison to Plato's idealized account of homosexual love in both interest and significance. Contrary to popular belief, the world was not a paradise for gays, as they claim to have proven. But this finding doesn't necessarily signify anything on its own. Poets and philosophers have been inspired by platonic love's heritage. Yet the sordid sensationalism of the day cannot be satisfied by the mundane facts about the real lives of the ancient world. The dichotomy was aptly summarized by a modern Greek retailer who said, "Forget the great philosophers. It's books about sex, women, and food in the ancient world that are really selling." Was he an opponent or an ally? With varied degrees of effectiveness, the dialogues of Plato have been used and abused to justify just about every position imaginable. On one hand, supporters of gay rights can use his symposium as evidence that the author endorses particular types of homosexual relationships and uses them as the basis for a study of erotic love, while on the other, antis might assert their authority by quoting passages from the laws that appear to call for legislation prohibiting male-to-male relationships. Experts had different reactions to this. For example, Catherine Glass reveals that Phaedrus in the Symposium expresses what Plato believed. The laws reject homosexual intercourse because it can make men unfit for marriage, which is against nature, and is a shameless indulgence. In connection with this, she believes that Phaedrus is endorsing pederasty, not homosexual intercourse in general, and Plato condemns homosexual intercourse in both the Laws and the Republic. There is also the possibility that the fact that the laws advise against engaging in homosexuality, along with adultery, fornication, and the use of prostitutes, also influenced Plato's line of thinking about the entire concept of love between the same gender. Sadly, Plato died before he could even make sense of everything. But I guess it's safe to say that we should not assume that Plato's intention while writing Symposium was to outright condemn gay behavior. People say that there are always two sides to a story, and in Plato's case, he ran out of time before he was able to completely tell his own. At most, Plato provided further weight to the notion of non-physical love by ascribing heterosexual traits to Socrates and highlighting his absence of physical homoerotic desire, both of which are evident in the other orators. And for now, we must make do with what we have and maybe read some more to understand what homosexuality meant for one of the greatest philosophers in history. That's it for today's video. Make sure to comment below what you think and give this a like and subscribe for more stories from history.